Hello guys, how are we doing and welcome back to the channel, and more importantly welcome back to the next spawn guide for Hardpoint that will get you ready for ranked play when it drops in a few hours. I say a few hours, in tomorrow it will be dropping. Today we're going to be focusing on Protocol. I have so far covered Vault, Rewind and Skyline, so if you want to see the spawn guide for those, you can see them down in the most recent videos or in the playlist below. For those of you who are new to the series, welcome first of all, and secondly, this is a guide that will hopefully help you understand how the spawns work better on this particular map. We go through each hardpoint, i.e. P1, P2, P3, P4, each hill, and go through the logic and how you can block, some strategy and some scenarios that you can apply to when you're actually in game to hopefully get you more wins on this map mode combo. Before we get into it, there's a couple of things I want to shout out. First of all, you guys have been massive on the views recently. The amount of new subs I've got in, the amount of views I'm seeing on the most recent videos have been absolutely unreal. So I appreciate every single one of you who are tuning in and enjoying the content I produce. And I'm glad I'm producing content that you guys want to see. And second of all, for those of you who aren't audio learners and you don't learn by someone talking you through things, there's an alternative to what I'm doing here. Using the link down below, or you can join my Discord to find the link. There is a Call of Duty ranked play guide that I am building. It's completely free, and some people may want to have this up alongside this video, maybe on your phone, your second monitor, or a tablet. And essentially, it's a guide to every single thing I put on YouTube. It's just a version of that, but in this sort of format. So, for example, if I want to look at the Vault Hardpoint spawn guide, I literally have to go to this page. And there's the spawn guide. So you've got a little bit of an image. You've got all the writing for the hills, and that'll be the same. By the time this video uploads for Protocol, you'll have this exact thing for Protocol as well. So, without further ado, let's get into it. So Protocol is a fairly weird map. Before we go through with the details of P1 spawns itself, for those of you who are new, I want to talk you through what I'm showing on the map here, because it can be a little bit confusing if you haven't seen this before, and if I go straight into it. The first thing are the different coloured rings, so yellow, pink, blue and teal. They represent the actual spawn locations themselves, so you'll find yourself, when P1 is active, spawning in any four of these spawn points, okay? Talking of which, P1 is, or the current hill, is located and highlighted in this bright green square, and the next hill, which is important to know when you are controlling spawns, is a little bit less bright. So P1 is the current one we're focusing on. P2, for example, is the next one, and it's a little bit dimmer, a little bit more transparent. You then notice these coloured blobs across the map. They represent areas in which you can block that colour spawn point from, potentially. There's other variables in there as well, but they're just some ideas of where you can block that spawn point from. And yeah, that's the map. To give you guys an idea of what we're looking at, because I know this is sometimes hard to imagine in your head where we are on the Protocol map itself. You've got the heli down here, you've got the big radio tower here, you've got like the green grass with the boat at the top here. The first hardpoint with the gun and the flak tower is here. You've got like a castle thing here, a torture room. You've got lockers and P3 here, which has the nice little zip line that takes you all the way up. The lift is here, and that should hopefully help you understand it. So going into the actual spawns itself, enough of the intro. It's been 3.5 minutes, enough of me rambling on about stuff you're not here to listen to. The main two spawns you're going to see are blue, which is BS&D, and pink, which is castle. Teal and the yellow, which is near the trees and the back grass bit over here, are the alternative spawns used when the two primary ones are being blocked. Again, the game will look to spawn the next player spawning in at the furthest possible spawn point away from any one of their enemies, okay? And that's the logic for most of these hills on this map. Now, when we're talking about blocking in the most simple way, shape or form, in order to block a certain spawn, somebody on your team needs to be closer to that spawn than anyone else is on the team from any one of the other spawn points, okay? So if you wanted to, for example, if you wanted to block yellow spawn here, you'd need to make sure that you're closer to it than anyone on your team is close to teal or blue, and that'll make sure that the team definitely won't spawn there. They'll either spawn one of these two spawns. Now, if you wanted yellow, you know, at some potential spots, if you wanted to block yellow, sorry, some potential spots could be on P2, in this yellow shaded area, on the pallet heady here, and on the right-hand side of top bunk windows. That will just close enough to yellow where it will most likely be blocking that spawn. Obviously, if your teammate pushes all the way up and they're really close to both of these spawns, the game will look to flip. But generally, as long as you're playing with people who aren't too aggressive or too gung-ho, you'll be fine blocking it from that area. Now, some potential block spots for the pink spawn here in Castle could be on the right-hand side of P1, just here, bunk windows up here, or lower bunk, which is essentially where the pool table is, and that'll most likely block Castle. Again, unless someone on your team gets really aggro and blocks these two spawns and pretty much gets themselves into this situation when my cursor is here. Now, in order to block blue, you could be on that side of P1, for example, or on the BS and D side of P3, so these two blue shaded areas. Now, in the most simple terms, that sounds a little bit complex. It's probably a lot for you guys to remember. In the most simple terms, someone on your team could push up to the enemy's red line. So let's say we're pink here. Okay, let's say we're spawning this right-hand side of the map. An enemy or a teammate can push up to this red line, as long as and you won't flip so long as you've got someone this side of your line. Okay, so for example, this was I wanted to be here. I'd need someone to get up to that line. I'd need to have someone this side of this red line so that this wouldn't flip the spawn. Okay, now obviously that's really tight. So let's take a little bit of a different view here. So this is more likely what we're going to see. Okay, so if your team wants to get a little bit more aggressive than that, because obviously when we look at this, it means, okay, I can't cross this line. That's pretty limiting, blah, 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 blah. Absolutely fine. Let's say we wanted to get a little bit more aggressive here. So if someone wants to get more aggressive, and let's say they want to put up to this orange line instead, which is potential. So let's say, for example, they wanted to sit this side of P1, and we're coming from the pink side. What you would need is someone on your team to be happy to sit behind this orange line. So that someone on your team's closer to these two spawns than you would be to this back spawn here. And that's how the logic works, okay? And obviously, if you want to push up even further, you need someone on your team even further back. And it's like a scaling line where the further you want to push up or further someone on your team pushes up, the further back someone on your team has to be to block, make sure it doesn't flip. Now, let's take some scenarios here. If you spawn blue or pink, and you're with your team, it just means that that's your current default spawn and your enemy hasn't pushed much further from their own spawn, okay? Now, if you go from spawning at your primary, which are these two ones here, to your alternative, it simply means the enemy has control of the other side of the map, but are pushed towards your primary spawn as well. And as a result, you haven't flipped and you're not spawning at your primary spawn. Now, if you flip spawns, it essentially means the enemy has completely left their old spawn and are far enough into your current two spawns to flip. So it means they're super aggressive and there's got no one really coming off their old spawn. Now, don't forget, if you're spawning, this happens across any hardpoint hill, across any hardpoint map. If you are spawning consistently at the same point, there's nothing to worry about other than the fact your enemies aren't moving much, okay? A change in spawn is what should trigger a thought process and go, okay, why have I changed spawns? Why am I now spawning here when I was spawning there? That's what should make you think and make you go, okay, well, it's because they pushed this side, for example. So strategy on P1 is quite simple. I'd recommend trying to get the castle spawns here due to it being closer to P2 than these two spawns are for P2. Now, once you have these spawns, it's quite simple. You simply need someone top bunk, overlooking the players, somebody watching P2 flank, and somebody on time potentially, and then someone lingering around mid-map but not too far pushed up to cause a flip. Okay, so you've got someone bunk, someone watching this P2 flank, someone on hill, and then someone just roaming around this middle area here, but not being too aggressive because otherwise the enemies will simply flip behind you. Now, when it gets to the end of P1, you want to commit another player towards the P2 flank because chances are people from this left-hand side are going to want to send more people to push the P2 and rotate to the new spawn. So that's what you'd want to do when you get towards the end of P1. Now, if you were spawning on the tree side over to the left-hand side here, you want to try and take as many routes as you can early on to flip these spawns, because as I say, these spawns on the right-hand side are better for both P1, in my opinion, and P2. So you want to try and flip them as much as you can. Obviously, this will take winning gunfights, but spawning on the right-hand side of the map is in your best interest for this next hill, as well as the current hill we're on. Now remember, whatever side you have, you need to make sure you're accounting for all 4 players on the enemy team. This is a really weird map where there's a completely different lane under the map, which can be a really simple and easy flank route if it's not being watched. So if you're noticing that one player isn't appearing on the kill feed and you're thinking, okay, I haven't seen them in a while, just make sure you check your flank, make sure you're making sure they're not coming up your lift or up your spiral, because chances are that's what's happening. They're trying to flank and they're potentially trying to flip you for your better, to spawn you at the worst spawns. Now, moving on to P2, again, the main two spawns here, the two primary spawns are blue, which is in the lockers next to P3, and pink, which is back radio tower. And you'll keep spawning here if the enemies aren't really flanking or aggressing too much. Now, the two alternative spawns are teal, which finds itself sort of in the tree area near the arches, and yellow, which is back useless, okay? The game will look to spawn you, again, at the furthest possible spawn from an enemy spawn, for an enemy to spawn you at. So blocking here is essential if you want to make sure your team, if you want someone on your team to push up a little, okay? If your teammate pushes closer to their spawn, then you've got someone blocking where you want to keep spawns, you'll flip, okay? So you need someone blocking the spawn if you want someone on your team to push up a little bit. Now, in the most simple way, in order to block a certain spawn, somebody on your team, as I say, needs to be closer to that spawn than anyone else is on the team from any other of the spawn points. Okay, it's that simple. Some potential block spots for pink spawns include being on P2 itself, P2 steps, pallet heady, just around this top middle bit. Okay. Now, some potential block spots for blue. Which is essential if you want to spawn them all the way out here, because you want to, you know, if you're on the pink side, you'd much rather them spawn in here than here because it's further from the hill. So if you want to block blue, if you're on this corner of P2, you can push up to boat, you can push up to middle, you can potentially push up to P1, but you've got to be very careful. If you push closer to this blue spawn, this teal spawn, than someone is to this, they'll, instead of them spawning here, they'll literally flip and spawn behind you. So you've got to be very careful that if you are pushing up, you've got someone close to these back two spawns, making sure the enemy can't spawn back there. Again, in simple terms, someone on your team has the ability to push up to this red line. Let's say we're on the pink, they can push up to this red line as long as you have someone else behind this red line. So that's probably going to be pretty easy. If you're spawning here, you're on the hill, chances are you're going to be behind this side of the line, which means that your teammates can then push up to here. So it's not, that doesn't give you much. So let's take a look at a bit of more of an aggressive scenario. So if you want to get more aggressive, and let's say you want to push up to this orange line instead and you want to get middle control, you'd need someone pulled back behind this orange line. So in order to push up to this orange line and for them not to flip, you need someone behind this orange line so that they don't spawn here, okay? The further, I'm going to reiterate this because it's so important, the further someone on your team is pushed back, the further someone else on your team is pushed forward, sorry, the further someone else on your team needs to pull back to block. Pushing up so either one of these lines will cause the enemy to spawn at the alternative spawn, and essentially being behind your orange line means that your alternative is blocked and they'll spawn at their one. Hope that's clear. Again, any questions throughout this, you can either DM me on Discord, Twitter, or X, whatever you want to call it, or just leave a comment down below. So let's take some scenarios here similar to what we did on P1. If you spawn either blue or pink, so either lockers or back radio, it simply means that the enemy aren't moving too much from their spawn, which is unlikely to see in the real world because of how many people want control of P2. So sometimes you'll spawn there because you've just got 4 down, for example, and you've got good map control. So there's no need for the game to spawn you here because this is just as safe a spawn as it would be spawning you here. Now, if you spawn at your alternative spawn, so if you go from blue to teal or pink to yellow, it essentially means that the enemy have control of the other side of the map and are pushed up a little, okay? And that'll block your primary spawn, and because they've still got control of their side of the map, it will block their spawn as well. So you've just spawned a little bit further back than your current position. Now, if you flip on this hill, it essentially means the enemies are closer to your alternative spawn than they are to their own alternative spawn. Okay, so if you're spawning these two spawns and suddenly you're over here and you spawned here, that basically means the enemies are closer to these two spawns than they are to this one, which means the game has thought that that's the safest spawn and it's put you there when you next respawn. Now, strategy-wise here, again, the pink spawn is the desired spawn because of how close it is to the hill and how easy it is to funnel the enemy spawning from the other side of the map. An ideal setup, in my perspective, in my humble opinion, an ideal setup would mean having someone hanging back a bit towards your yellow spawn, but also having someone pushed up towards the middle of the map. What that will do is cause the enemies to spawn all the way teal, and typically when people spawn in teal, they're going to run straight ahead. The chance of them taking a route and going a different way is unlikely. They're going to run straight down to boat, potentially go up to lockers, but they're going to run straight down boat and be a really easy read for you. So if you can get them spawning teal, it's great because chances are they're going to be funneled into a real easy spot to look at and to look over, especially if you've got control of mid and P2. Now, If you're not fortunate enough to have these pink spawns, you do not want to fall into the trap I just mentioned. If you end up spawning here, don't just run forward, run around and try and take a route, okay? You want to try and take a route to get to the enemy spawn, get the kills, and then you'll be spawning the enemies out and your team will start to spawn in. It sounds simple, but obviously you need to be the better people, you need to be the better players in order to win, not just in logic, you have to win gunfights as well. Unfortunately, you can't just win spawns for free. Now, flanking on this map is relatively easy, but it might take a little bit more time. So when it starts to get into the second half of P2, it's probably worth giving the flip up, fight P2 from the front, but just make sure you don't flip so that when P3 pops, you're not also fighting for those bad spawns again. So what I'm trying to say is if you're on the blue team and it gets to the end of P2, maybe with like 15, 20, 25 seconds even left, don't worry about trying to flip the spawns because realistically you want these left-hand side spawns ready for P3. So this is probably a little bit simple. There's only pretty much one slide on this one, so I'll probably try and whiz through it as quickly as possible. So here the main spawns are the blue and pink spawns, and you're probably wondering why are there so many of those spawns? There are 3 pink spawns around BS&D and arches, so these 3 areas here, and there are 2 blue spawns around pallets and tin. The game will use whatever spawn is furthest away from the enemy. So for example, let's say the team spawning blue side spawns pallets. If someone on the enemy team is pushed, someone on the blue team will spawn pallets if someone on this pink team is pushed up this right-hand side of the map here, around this area here. Similarly, the blue team will spawn tin if this pink team has someone pushed up this left side here. And it works on the other side as well, so the pink team are more likely to spawn on this top one here if someone from the blue team is pushed up left. And again, they're more likely to spawn BS and D if someone from the blue team is pushed up this right-hand side here, okay? Now teal, which is this spawn here, the one at castle, spawns, that opens up when both blue and pink spawns are both being blocked, which we'll get onto right now. So first of all, you can block all pink spawns by being around the back of P3, okay? In this general area, that will block pretty much all of these pink spawns. And this is likely to spawn your enemies blue. However, if both blue and pink are blocked, as I say, it will spawn the enemies teal. And you can block blue by being around the mid gun on that sort of heady just there. Now, if a team is blocking blue and teal, which is often done by a player coming off the tin spawn, so if a player literally just spawns there, when they spawn in, they'll be blocking blue and teal. And they have someone in the pink zone as well. That person in the pink zone might be thinking that they're spawning the enemies out because they're in the pink zone. But in actual fact, because the teammates are blocking both of these 2 spawns, the enemy will still spawn here. Okay, so just be very careful. If your team are blocking essentially 3 spawn points, and you're in cheeks all the way back here, the enemies may still spawn on you. Okay, so this has to be open in order for your enemies to spawn out. So if a team has players tin and BS&D, for example, then the other team will spawn archers. Okay. Whereas if you've got if one team has players tin and archers, like up here, the player is likely to spawn BS&D, so it will still force the spawn back here, even though this player's right here. Okay, and that's because this is being blocked. So it's essential that when you spawn tin, you get out of there as quickly as you can and open up that spawn behind you. So when your teammates are getting kills, it flips rather than just spawn them really close to the current objective. Now, remember, as I said, your spawn only changes if the enemy's tactics or push positions change. So if your spawn doesn't change, don't worry too much. There's nothing really to read. Now, if you spawn BS&D, it means the enemies are coming from the right-hand side of the map and are pushed towards the top gun rather than P1. And on the flip side of that, as I say, if you spawn archers, it tends to mean the enemy's coming from, again, this right-hand side of the map and maybe pushed towards P1 rather than gun. Now, if you spawn pallets up here, again, it means the enemy, this might sound like I'm just repeating myself, but I'm trying to repeat myself so it's really logical. If you spawn pallets, chances are an enemy's got control of this area and they're pushed up this side. Whereas if an enemy spawns tin, if you find yourself spawning tin, it probably means the enemy's got this side of the map controlled and they're pushed up towards this top hand side, otherwise you'd spawn there. Make sense? As I say, if you spawn castle or teal, it means the enemies have the other side of P3 controlled and they're situated in mid somewhere. So if you ever spawn all the way back here, just be very careful that when you run off spawn, it's probably worth checking all these headies here before you just run out into the open, because chances are there's going to be somebody there, otherwise you'd have spawned closer. Now, strategy-wise, it goes without saying that the best side to have on this map, or at least on this hill, is this pink side, due to how close it is to the current objective, okay? Doesn't take a brainiac to know. Now, winning the initial gunfights are important, as you'll need some time to push out towards the middle of the map and have the enemy spawn in all the way in teal. That's the desired setup, okay? Is to have the enemy spawning all the way over here at the furthest possible spawn point from the current objective. But don't forget, when you have somebody pushed up towards this middle side of the map, you need to have someone actively blocking the pink spawn in order to avoid the enemy spawning behind P3, okay? So if you've got someone pushed up in the back, maybe have someone pull back a little bit BS&D. Whoever's on time sits on the back door facing archers, and you should be good. So now if you don't have the pink spawns, shame on you. No, I'm joking. If you don't have the pink spawns, you need to try and focus all your energy as a team to flip. Now, this is doable by taking a route through heli, so all the way on the left here, or through boat, blocking the pink spawn and getting the initial kills. If you don't get the initial kills, so even if you do flank and try and get into them, if you die first, you will spawn out. And if you're spawning here, it means the enemy can't spawn out. Okay, so you need to try and get the initial kill first, otherwise the enemy's just going to keep constantly spawning here. So playing your life as a team and making sure your team shotting is important, rather than just going one by one trying to flank, because otherwise it will never flip. Again, same with any hill. When it gets too late into P3, don't worry too much about it. Just probably rotate and set for P4. So this is a really weird spawn, okay? And it's a really weird hill, sorry. And it's a really weird hill because it is underground. And obviously all these little maps here and all the little designs are for the on top of ground. So apologies, it doesn't look quite right, but I'm going to ask you guys to use your imagination just a tad. So the main two spawns here are pink near the trees and blue, which is front castle. But because blue is so close to the middle of the map, the two alternative spawns, yellow and teal, tend to get used a little bit more. Teal is located at the back of castle, just behind the initial blue spawn, and yellow is in like back useless, pretty much behind radio tower, back useless back there. Now, at the moment, if you're watching any sort of like hardpoint tournament for the pros, even the pros to be fair, you'll notice that these spawns are flipping a lot currently, and that's because people seem to have less structured setups on the hill simply because it's underground, which I don't get, which we're going to get onto later. But that tends to be why you tend to find when players are setting up for P4, every single one of that team is underground, which means that they're not really controlling either side of the map, which means that any sort of kills just happen to flip. Obviously, to stop a flip, as you guys know, if you've watched spawns before, you need someone dedicated to blocking one side of the map. But obviously, when all players are sort of in that one room in P4, that's harder to do. So, using these red lines here, so hopefully they help. Normally, I'd be able to tell you individual spots, so those little highlighted shaded areas to block certain areas. But the easiest way to visualize it is on a map like this, I hope at least. Now, you can see here that if you want to keep pink spawn and stop the enemies from flipping behind you, you need someone further back than Spiral itself. So Spiral is the furthest left position when you're underground. It's that little spiral staircase that goes up and goes down to P4. And you really want actually someone further back than that in order to block this back pink spawn, okay? Now, that's the case if you have someone pushed up lift. So what you'll notice here is the lift, both the lift and spiral are underground, but in order to, if you have someone pushed up lift, which is absolutely fine, at the bottom of the lift or the elevator, whatever you want to call it, you actually need someone who's not even at the bottom, because it's you need, in order to block anyone pushed up to lift, you need to be further back than spiral, okay? So in order, if you want someone bottom P4 pushed up to lift, you need someone sat top P3 maybe on the elbow here, just making sure that they can't spawn behind you. So that's a really nice way to visualize that. If you don't want anyone to spawn lift, if you don't want to push up to lift, fine, but you just got to be very careful that all it would take is an enemy to move this side of the map and you'd flip. So in any case, you sort of do want someone top P3 looking over the map, which again, we're going to get into a setup in a minute. Now, if you have someone blocking pink spawn by being further back than your furthest pushed up player, you can then decide whether you want the enemy team to spawn teal or yellow. And in order to do that, essentially, first of all, as again, you need someone far enough back to block pink, and then you decide if you want them to spawn yellow, you push up on this right-hand side of the map closer to teal. But if you want them to spawn teal, you want to push up on the left-hand side of the map closer towards the yellow spawn. But again, if you don't have someone blocking and you push up either side, they're simply going to flip. So let's take some scenarios here. So if you spawn pink, and all it means is that the enemy are located more towards the other 3 spawn points, and likely means that your team have recently spawned here. That's probably just your home spawn for that point. Now, if you spawn blue, it means the enemy are likely all coming off a spawn, because otherwise you'd spawn further out. They'd literally have to be all the way over here in order for you to spawn blue, pretty much. So that gives you that information. Okay, if you spawn blue, chances are you can probably get to middle just before they get to middle. So that's a pretty good situation. But as I said before, blue's quite a rare spawn point because of how easy it is to block. Now, if you spawn at either teal or yellow, so back castle or back useless, all this means is that the enemy has control over this pink side of the map. They have someone blocking, whether it means they're just coming off that pink spawn or they're actively trying to block, and also push slightly towards the other side of the map. So if you spawn yellow, they're here and here. If they spawn teal, they're here, blocking pinkish spawns, and they're up this side, okay? Now, I prefer the pink side of the map because of how easy it is to influence these spawns. And from this side, therefore, it's easy. And then when you can influence the spawn and you know where they're spawning, it's easy to read routes and then pick them off as they come on off that spawn. No matter what side you have, you just need to make sure someone on your team, and it will probably be you if you're solo queuing, is controlling the spawn. Whether that's blocking pink, for example, or if your team are already blocking pink, that's being pushed up to P1 or boat to, you know, spawn them teal or yellow. And that will really control where the enemies are spawning. And if you know where the enemies' teams are spawning, as I say, their push routes from that hill to the objective, from that spawn point to the hill to the objective, will be more readable. Now, the important thing to remember is that there are 3 entrances to the hill. Okay, I see a lot of focus whenever I watch this in just regular 8s or in even Pro 8s at this point. I'm sure it will change when they learn and maybe they watch a video. No, a lot of the teams like to have all 4 of their players in that bottom P4 building. But realistically, there are 3 entrances. If we think about this logically, you have the lift, which is the little zip line that goes up and down into the bottom bit. You have the spiral staircase, which comes from lockers over here. So lift, spiral, and then you have the main boat doors, okay? Now, if you're spawning pink, you know the enemy. So, and if you're top P3, like around here, you know an enemy's not going to be going spiral, okay? If you're looking over mid-map, you can make sure they can't get into your building, and it's that simple. Now, what you could also have is somebody back here watching the big door, and that means that they then can't come big door or spiral, which then leaves one person, one area left to watch the entrance to P4, and that could simply be the person on the hill. If you want, you could have a couple people down there, but generally speaking, you don't need everyone down there. You just need to make sure someone's got a line of sight towards the big door at the front and stopping enemies from getting in that way. You need to make sure someone's sat in like a building or somewhere in this, this side of the map to make sure they can't come down your side entrance. So spiral if you're on this side, lift if you're on this side, and then the person on hill can literally just watch the other version. So it should be that simple, and then one other player can literally do what they want. They can, be that roaming player maybe going underground, maybe going up top, depending on where they need that help. But there is no reason to have every single player on your team in P4 when you've got the enemies killed. Okay, now if they're sending players consistently underground themselves, obviously you have to counter that. But when you're set up, a real good setup should not involve every single player going under the ground, because that leads to unreadability, unpredictability, and it means you have 0 map control other than that tiny little room that you're in. So yeah, that's pretty much Protocol Hardpoint. I hope this video has helped. Again, if you have any questions, leave it down in the comments. Make sure you share this with your squad mates. Let's just make sure you share this with your friends. And hopefully we can get some sort of sensible teammates when we load in with randoms on Ranked Play tomorrow. That'll do for me. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one. Ciao for now.